caregiver burnout is something that is so real and something that I don't think gets talked about enough. And so when you have like conflict and you have somebody that's tired and you've got somebody that's in dire need of care, again, it's like this bigger conversation, and you got to take a bigger view of customer service in that moment because you're serving both sides.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zingage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zingage, the leading caregiver engagement platform. I am joined today by Betsy Milne, owner, COO of Home Helpers of Modesto?
San Mateo County.
San Mateo. I missed by...
San Mateo County. You were close, in the vicinity, yes.
I want you to know my California geography is I roughly know where the Bay is, and I roughly know where Los Angeles is, and I know where Yosemite is, and then the rest of it is like probably what most people see when they look at like my part of the country, just a big bluff.
So I am the peninsula. So in the Bay Area, from the coast to the actual Bay, just below San Francisco to San Jose, kind of like that whole little leg there is
amazing.
My area. Yeah.
Very good. So how close are you to John Steinbeck's house?
I have no idea. I'm not a native Californian.
Oh yeah, you're not. I remember this now.
I should look that up.
Well, how would you introduce yourself, not a native Californian, for the people who aren't familiar with you?
Well, you just introed me. I am. I'm the owner and CEO of Home Helpers of San Mateo County. You know what's funny? I know that you were going to ask me this question, and I used to have like this great bio when I would do podcast episodes and all the different things. But I'm definitely one of those people where I like the questions to get to know me a little bit better. As you and I were talking about before this, we all contain multitudes. But I mean, on the surface, I provide in-home care for seniors to help them feel safe and comfortable at home. Yeah. Wherever they call home. So that's my primary goal right now.
Well, and one of the things that I appreciate about you and the business that you're a part of is it's very much a family business, as many home care agencies are. But you guys are doing something that is difficult to do and is, very rare to have been done successfully, which is you guys are doing a generational transfer or a within the family transfer of ownership of the business from one person to another. So talk a little bit about that, how you got interested in buying the business, how any of that even happened in the first place.
My sister and her husband actually started our agency 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago. And they just had this desire to help. They really loved the business model. Both of them had taken care of parents. When they started this business, our dad had Alzheimer's. He was diagnosed with like early onset Alzheimer's. And I don't think he was sick at that point, but over the course of them building their business, I moved home and I stayed with my parents for the last 5 years of my dad's life. Wow. And it was out of a necessity, at least for me, to go and help him because my parents wanted to retire to this beautiful countryside in northern Pennsylvania that was literally rural, and there was no home care around. Like, they thought that they were doing the right thing. They lived close to the border near Binghamton, New York, but it was a different state, and you can't cross state lines. And as we know, this is a highly regulated industry. And so for me, the way that I got into this was just by helping my dad and watching my sister build her business. When COVID hit, there's a lot of things that happened sort of at once, but my dad had a fall, he had surgery. There was a cascading effect of the surgery that put him on hospice, which happened the day that COVID lockdown happened in Pennsylvania. So we got my dad home on hospice the same day that everything shut down. In the midst of all of this, my sister was out in California, and she's walking me through like what kind of help we need. And of course we couldn't get any help because COVID. And I had started to work literally a month before. I had started to work for her doing just the finance side of things. I was helping her with that. So that was really my introduction into the home care space, was, being at home with my dad, going through the hospice process, while also learning the finance and the business side of a business, because I was just looking for something to sort of supplement my income. It was happening while also building my own business, but the timing of it, when I look back on everything, it's pretty fascinating how it all lined up at one specific point. And so I was the finance manager for 3 years, and then my dad passed away, and I took care of my mom for a couple of years. And my sister and her husband, my sister has a different mom, so we share the same dad, different mom. She wanted to go up to Canada to take care of her mom.
Sure.
And so she made that move during the COVID time period. And they were in California for 3 months 2 years ago, and I was on the phone with my sister, and I was like, I should have taken that marketing job when Mitch offered it to me. And she's like, let me buy you a plane ticket.
Yeah.
I was like, what? And she's like, let me buy you a plane ticket. Like, we're looking to sell the business, come see what the day-to-day is really like. And so I hopped on a plane, and 3 weeks later, I actually moved back out here and started taking over full time as director of operations. And we talked about different ways that it would look like with me stepping in and taking over and buying the business. But it's ended up, I purchased the entire agency a year ago. And so now I'm the full-time owner.
Cool.
So,
and one of the things that we've chatted about a little bit is there's kind of this, I think, tension sometimes when being a business owner in home care of not wanting to come across as really profit motivated, but still wanting to build an asset that people want to pay for. And so talk to me a little bit about kind of your long-term goal for the business, and then, how you kind of think about that tension between providing value and being kind of altruistic and mission driven, but also thinking through this as I'm building an asset that someone might like to purchase.
Yeah, I always looked at it from an asset from day one. So my background, I am very entrepreneurial. Even when I was a kid, we joked, I sold the most Girl Scout cookies. I started a babysitter's club. I grew up saying, I want to be a CEO when I grow up. Yep. Not knowing what that was, but I've always understood, I like being my own boss. I like being in charge. I've built businesses. I've been building businesses since I was 24. And so when I came into this process, I really gave myself 10 years. Yep. I said, this is my 10-year plan. Everyone was like, what? I was like, I'm going to retire at 55 if I want. And so I think in terms of, because I've started businesses before, and because I have a background in, businesses that don't work out always because of business partners and different relationships and markets and things like that, I really came into this experience with my eyes wide open. Sure. So did I understand the entire business model? No. Did I see the possibilities? Yes. Did I come into it to serve? 100%. But to me, there's definitely a 10-year marker on this. And so everything that I do, from optimizing systems, looking at numbers, I'm very KPI driven. Yeah. And I think that helps me on those days when I feel like I'm just drinking from a water fountain. What is it? Drinking from a fire hydrant is Sure. how it's sometimes. Some days you're drinking from the hose, some days it's a garden hose. Most days in this industry, I feel like you're drinking directly from the fire hydrant, yeah. and you're just trying to keep up. So having that plan definitely makes it feel a little bit more manageable. It's not what I totally expected, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's great. I think one of the things that stands out to me there is the mission, probably a lot of days, is the motivation to keep doing the thing. Mm-hmm. But I've been around home care long enough to know that the mission isn't sufficient every day. There's days where you're I don't care that this is good for people because it's a really hard day. And so it almost strikes me that having two different reasons to be in it that don't conflict, but are pretty different in kind of the part of your brain and heart and stuff that they use can, even if you're not feeling particularly compassionate or empathetic or whatever that day, you've got your KPIs and dashboards and stuff to take a look at, and it can, provide an additional kind of motivation to you.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where I love the people side of our business. It's funny. There's a lot of duality in me. I love the people side. I love the conversations. I love going out, but you're right. Some days I'm just let me stay behind my cute little desk and focus on the numbers and make a plan and be able to stick with it, because when you're dealing with people and when you're in a people business, every day is different. There's no set schedule, ever.
Yeah. Well, we talked a whole lot about home care already. So normally I this is like the 2-minute mark in the episode, but this is really good. But I always, I play this game called What Kind of Person Are You? Where I'm going to just kind of get it, like what makes you the kind of person that you are. In order to ask you that, I want to ask you the question, what could you start a podcast about?
Oh, David. So I actually once started a podcast teaching women how to run businesses online based on the lunar cycle.
Okay.
There's behind this very boss CEO facade, there is an extremely woo-woo, loves astrology and human design and crystals and candles and all of the things. And so, I have, my nickname growing up was Betsy Milne. And so I used to have a podcast and I used to teach women business all around that stuff. And it works. So, you know what? It was very successful and I'm very proud of it, but it shall not be named on this podcast. There will be you can dig it up if you find me online, but I've done it already.
Okay. Two follow-up questions. First of all, how many episodes did you do?
I think we stopped around 600.
600?
Yeah. I think the final tally with all the other, I've done about 700 podcast interviews, I think, between our podcast and other things that we have done over the years.
Yeah.
But I think we capped that one at 600, if I'm not mistaken. We did 2 a week for, 3 years.
That's That's insane. Okay. Second question. What do you feel like is the time that you got your woo-woo and it was just so perfect in terms of how this person needed to run their business?
Well, actually, I can speak from our business. So when we were building a business that we had started in network marketing. I was a health coach. My business partner at the time, she had a baby and she was very much into network marketing. And so I came into it with a blogging background and health coaching and yada, yada, yada. I was super burned out, ridiculously burned out. And I had read this obscure book about the lunar cycle and how to, use the phases of the moon energetically. And it sounds so crazy. And I'm laughing right now because I can't believe I'm talking about it on this podcast. But anyway, I actually built a business plan around the different phases of the moon. There's 8 phases of the moon and each has masculine and feminine energy. And you make intentions on this day and you take action on this day and you rest on these days. And no joke, we tripled our income in the month. And with this one lunar phase. And so I had an online course about it. I taught it for 4 years and just time and time again, it worked. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I still talk about it with my friends, but I don't teach it publicly anymore.
Well, thank you for talking about it on my podcast. I feel very blessed to be part of the inner circle. That is extremely fun. And I think just anecdotally, my wife is a social worker by training, has done a lot of mental health therapy in primary care settings. And she'd come home and she'd be like, I was trying to figure out why my day was weird. And I realized it's a full moon. And so there's definitely I think everybody who's in healthcare knows that the lunar cycle has an impact on the way people behave. And so it sounds like you've done a lot more thinking and research about that than the rest of us. So very cool. Yes. Well, you're here as somebody who has built not one business, but a number of businesses and has accomplished a lot of big stuff. But we're not here to talk about any of that. Instead, I bring people on this podcast to tell me about the big mistake that they've made and the way that it changed the way that they think about their business. So, Betsy, what's your big mistake?
Buying the business. No,
Sure.
I'm just kidding. I think the biggest mistake that I have made is trying to reinvent the wheel. I'll be completely honest. I think this is the thing that I see most people struggle with. I think when you get into business, I learned this very early on, and I have thankfully not made the mistake this time around, which I think is why this experience has been so organic and good and everything. You want to be your own boss and you want to make your mark and you want to do things your own way. And I think when you buy a franchise or you buy a business that's already established, there's a reason that it's successful. And you have to honor that piece of the pie, right? Like when you hire a vendor, you hire a vendor because they have a proven system, or you sign up for a program because it works. And so I think that's the piece that I think is the biggest mistake that most entrepreneurs make. Yes, there are people out there that are disruptors and they are meant to do things differently, but I think you have to understand the system and the universe that you're working within in order to be able to make those changes. And so when I go off the rails is when I'm like, oh no, I have to do it completely different. It's not about building from scratch. It's about taking what's working, tossing what's not, and keeping what is actually the right thing.
I think it's interesting that you are somebody who has a tendency towards reinventing the wheel and like, probably none of this has ever been done before. Let's try and like build it from scratch the first time. I mean, it just seems to me like you kind of knew that about yourself and you were like, okay, not only am I going to buy an established business, but you're buying an established business within a franchise system, which is very much like, don't reinvent the wheel, like we've got it. And so have there been times where you felt like, I think I want to reinvent the wheel right now in your current business, that you prevented yourself from doing so and that you felt like saved you a whole bunch of headache because you just kind of followed the system and didn't reinvent the wheel?
Yes and no. So I feel like the things that I want to reinvent are sort of my structures, right? So like how I have KPI reports, right? I had my assistant like build me this incredible KPI report, and you just copy and paste, and it did all the functioning. And then we used it for like a month, and then I was like, oh, this is way too complicated. Like this is an extra step that I just don't need in my day. When I started on as director of operations, I was tasked with like going through the whole hiring process and the SOP. And I got like 3/4 of the way through it. And I was like, why are we doing this? Like, it's fine. We don't need to fix this right now. And yes, so I have never really actually felt the need in this business model to rip anything apart and start from scratch, which has been really fun. But I definitely have those moments where I'm like, why are you doing this right now? Like, this works. There's nothing wrong. Don't fix it. So,
yeah, it sounds like done is better than perfect in a lot of areas of the business.
Yes, as a recovering perfectionist, I can say that done is way better than perfect. So, yeah.
This is a perfectionist support group. So thanks for being here for this meeting. Of course. Done is better than perfect. And then I think there's this concept where it's like I don't remember the trying to do too well, but it's like optimizing. There's some kind of language in that, but versus satisficing, which is this is good enough. And with the kind of studies around those two different types of categories say is basically that people who satisfice and say, this is good enough, I always say close enough for rock and roll, are actually happier with their decisions than the people who try to like over index for perfection and end up being disappointed because you're like, it's never going to measure up to the perfect KPI dashboard that lives inside of your brain. Yeah,
no. And who has time to keep up the KPI dashboard in their brain? Like I have learned over the years, I was always an overthinker. Like early in my career, I would second guess every conversation that I had. And I would say, I would replay conversations over and over and over. And thankfully I'm at a stage in my career in my life where, if I mess up, okay. But like, was the end goal reached? Did we make the connection that we needed to? Were the questions answered? Can I pick up the phone and just call somebody back and explain what I forgot to tell them? Like, yes, you can. And so I think there's a lot of freedom in that, giving yourself permission to not have all the answers, and also just know that there's always a solution. You might have to be a little bit more creative, but you don't have to replay everything in your mind because it doesn't help.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense to me. Okay, we're going to move to a part of the show where I ask you about something that's either underrated or overrated, but I think you're going to do something a little bit different here. So what's something that you think is either underrated or overrated in the industry?
Customer service, because both of them. I think it's both underrated and overrated. And I know that this is probably a bit of a controversial answer, but I'm going to explain myself. Customer service, or at least how I learned customer service. So my first real job was working for Disney World. And I went through all of their leadership training and traditions and all the cool things that Disney teaches you. So customer service was drilled in really, really early in my career. And there's this mindset that the customer is always right.
Sure.
We work in a people business. This business that we have in home care is a vulnerable people business. I think you meet people, typically you meet families at that point in time where, something is either falling apart, there's some sort of crisis that you have to step in and you have to help. And so, the client they're not always right. And I think that's a hard thing for some people to say when you've been drilled down for years and years and years that the customer is always right. I think that in the home care space, we need to be the experts when we're coming into families, but we also have to have our caregivers back at the same time. So that's why I think it's underrated, because I think we forget about it's not just the client that you are here to support. You're also there to support your team and your caregivers. But it's also overrated sometimes because, again, people come in and think they can demand the world from you, and that's just not how it works. And at some point, that's why I think customer service can be overrated, because it's like, well, you have to make this right. And it's like, but I am making it right. And so I think, there's a shifting perspective, at least for me, where customer service to me is all encompassing, but you have to look at both sides and who you're bringing together and how you're bringing them together and how you're solving conflict when you have a caregiver who, the caregivers are the gifts of the world, right? Like, to take care of someone, it's a physical job. It is a mentally exhausting job. Caregiver burnout is something that is so real and something that I don't think gets talked about enough. And so when you have conflict and you have somebody that's tired and you've got somebody that's in dire need of care, again, it's like this bigger conversation, and you got to take a bigger view of customer service in that moment, because you're serving both sides. And as the owner of an agency, or, I try to empower my employees to be able to have these harder conversations. I think we just need to take a step back and again, recognize it's a people business. And when people are involved, he said, she said, there's always two sides and the truth. Yeah. And you got to find the truth, and you've got to investigate to get to the truth sometimes. And, if you're in an emotional state yourself, you don't want to jump to the wrong conclusion. So there's a lot of patience, I think, that is needed in customer service these days.
Makes a ton of sense. I think thinking about for a second the client-facing side of this, where, I think the customer is always right is kind of this mantra that doesn't serve us well in home care. One of the things that I think about a lot is like the kind of mechanics around death and dying of, okay, we've got in the middle of a unbelievably emotional and grief-stricken kind of thing. We've got this weird kind of like party to throw and like this logistical exercise to organize. And I think part of that's a feature, that's not a bug, because in the middle of all of those big feelings that you just can't deal with all in the moment, having a thing to do to take your mind off of the spiral of dealing with that grief in the moment is really useful. But I think what often happens is the big emotions end up contaminating the logistics and make pieces of the logistics about way more than just the specifics. And so I have to imagine in the client-facing side of this, when you're talking to a family member and they are, at a 10 out of 10 on the anger scale, so much of that is them reflecting into that situation all of their complex feelings about mom or dad and what's going on with their care. And so anyways, that's a really long way to set up the question. How do you handle that kind of conversation differently now than when you first got into this role? And, maybe kind of customer is always right at it.
Ooh, that's a juicy question. So interestingly, I came into this on the back of losing my father. And so I was and I've said this to multiple people over the last couple of years, like the reason that I do what I do is because I know what it's like to be the child and not be able to be the child, and not grieve your loved one while they're going through it, and I think I always approach those situations because I have been in very similar situations with family where, the mom wants to take the pill and, the cocktail and go, and she's ready and everybody's been there and I've had my time. And then one daughter supports it. The other daughter doesn't support it. The son is yelling at us that, our caregiver's not doing a good job. And, because they're letting her smoke her cigarettes because it's her last day on earth. It is kind of crazy, those moments. And I think, I have grown a thicker skin than when I got into this. I still get emotional in those moments, but I think it's having emotion in those moments that helps you connect with people. And I have had clients that, going through hospice, using that again as an example. I've been chewed out, and because people are grieving, right? I think that's the other thing. Dementia, because that's what I was experienced with my parent. You're grieving them the entire time they are there. And so I had 5 years to grieve my dad while he was still alive. We lost him piece by piece by piece. And so when I approach clients and, I'm out in the field and I'm meeting people, I always look through that lens. Yeah, you're probably having a really terrible day. You want to cry? You can cry. I'm an open ear for you to will listen to what's going on. And it's not that our job is to validate people. I think our job is to see people, meet them where they're at, and match the care that they need in that moment. And so for me, I think it's a gift to be able to do what we do. I really do. Because like I said, we lived in an area where we had absolutely no options, and it was exhausting. And so, again, I think that's why caregivers are such a gift, and being able to provide caregivers is such a gift.
Tell me a little bit about the way that you think about customer service with your caregivers, and then some of the kind of granular tactical things that you're doing with your caregivers to make sure they know that they are kind of one of your most important stakeholders, most important customers in the business.
Well, it actually starts in their onboarding process. Even in literally, we have an onboarding process that we do. They are the first section. We introduce ourselves and our agency, and then we have a caregiver video of a caregiver. Her name's Renee. She's been with us for, I want to say 10 years now. And because again, this job, this business wouldn't exist without the caregivers. Somebody needs to be out there and helping our clients. And so in terms of how we support them, we do a lot for our caregivers. We've got competitive wages, which is, you have to have, I think, in this day and age. But we also do things like caregiver celebrations. We used to do them once a year. I want to do them at least 2 to 3 times a year, where everybody comes out. We go to a nice restaurant. We have a big buffet. We get together. We have music, great food, conversation. We give out awards, things like that. We also use your platform's Zingage, which I think has been one of the biggest gifts for us. We've tried other ones in the past, but just having a space where we can recognize caregivers. They love the point system. They love gamifying the point system. And, it's a great way, because our caregivers will call and say, hey, my points didn't show up because I wasn't able to clock out today. And then it's you get to have that conversation with them. We also have standards in the office where we're checking in. So, when they start a case within 24 hours, 1 week, 1 month, we go out into the field quite a lot, introduction. So I know every single caregiver. And if I don't, I make it my business within the first 2 weeks of them working to introduce myself. And that means going out into the field to see them. So I think, again, it's a people business. You have to see who you're working with. And I want them to know who they're working for, because I believe in them and I want them to feel supported.
That's great. And I think that emphasis on being out in the field, because you guys are not, a small operation of 10 or 15 caregivers. You've got some scale. And so, but I think it's so easy for there to become this big divide between the office and the field staff, and for, there to be just mistrust on all sides. And it sounds to me like one of the things that you've done really intentionally is to say, no, we're going to be in the field a lot, because that's serves a lot of different purposes. It's good face time with our clients and their families. It's good time for our caregivers to know that we're trying to catch them doing the right things and not just check up on them when we suspect that there might be something wrong. And so that sounds like a really good way to build a lot of trust with your caregivers and to have them know that you've got their back.
Yeah. And, again, clients change like if you've got dementia, if you've got Parkinson's, skill levels change, right? And so we want to make sure that the right person is there. Sometimes, relationships can become, I don't want to say toxic, but, our caregivers, our clients sometimes get so attached to a caregiver that they're not open to having anybody else in the home. And so what we try to do is we try to open those doors so that, in case their caregiver gets sick or something happens or they want to take a vacation, you can't really do that over the phone, I don't think. I think you have to have that FaceTime and that connection to make those difficult conversations a little bit easier. And it's not always easy to have the conversation, but, it's part of the business.
Yeah. As you continue to grow and scale the business, is this the kind of thing that you feel like you can keep doing as the owner indefinitely, or is there a way that you're upskilling your office staff to be able to take over some of that responsibility too?
So I have the mindset. I read a book a couple years ago called Workquake, and if anybody wants to build culture in their business, that in the culture code, Workquake and the culture code, I don't know who wrote either of them off the top of my head. Workquake talked a lot about the different perspectives of like employers and employees, like what employees are looking for and what employers are looking for. And one of the key takeaways for me was always just like invest in your employees. Like it does not matter if they're going to work with you for the rest of their lives, invest in them. And so my approach has always been, I will teach you what I know. Like there's no gatekeeping. If you want to learn how to do something, I'm going to teach you how to do it. It's the same thing. We have a lot of training programs that we can do, dementia training, advanced skills. I will teach it to you if you want it. You can take it and go work at another agency. But I think being mindful of where people are going, what they want to achieve in life, like that is the most important thing to me. And so I just want to keep giving those opportunities to my employees and my people in the field. I was a Girl Scout. I want to leave things better than I found it. So I think, again, I think that's the way of the future, right? Like if somebody's going to go out and represent me and my family, right? Because this is a family business and, it's like I have the honor of my sister's legacy to uphold. I don't want to send people out that, don't trust me or feel like they're missing something. Like, I think it's really important. And so, yeah, like office staff, leveling them up, I want to give them every opportunity that I possibly can. And, what I do is not for everybody, I'm sure. And I recognize that. But if you ask me to learn something or you want to take that step, I'm going to tell you everything that I can and support you all the way.
One of the things, I was talking with an owner and he was telling me about how he had to take one of his clients to court because they tried to privately hire the caregiver, and the caregiver gave some like really lame excuse, and then all of a sudden was working privately for this client, and so he's just and I could tell it was like really like breach of trust. Like that's a super irritating thing to have to deal with. Like you have to take some kind of action. So I say to him, I said, "How do you do all this without becoming completely jaded?" And he said to me, "I am completely jaded." And I thought, okay, well, that sounds hard. But one of the things that I think really stands out to me about the way that you've picked to run your business is like you are on purpose making yourself kind of vulnerable. You are giving pretty freely to people and saying, hey, here's all this stuff that you could use and potentially go somewhere else and end up competing with me. These skills I'm going to give to you, scheduler, care coordinator, et cetera, and you could go work somewhere else and I could lose out on my investment in you. But it strikes me that like you've done the math inside of your own brain and decided like being this kind of like having this kind of approach and posture towards your business is better for you in a lot of ways in the long run.
It is because it's an integrity for me, right? So like, yeah, sure. Somebody could quit tomorrow and go somewhere else and take these skills and transfer them. I also don't think that this is a business for everybody. Like, on paper, it sounds great. Oh, I want to be a scheduler. Oh, I want to be a care coordinator. But the reality of it is it's emotional. It's draining. It can be very stressful. I think we have really clear boundaries in our office. Like nobody works after hours. Nobody takes home cell phones. Like we have an on-call service for that reason. Like they're the ones that are managing, and, we have a manager on duty that has chosen to be there. And really, I think all employment regardless of what you do, like I'm choosing to be the owner of this company. I'm choosing to be the owner of the agency at this period of time in my life. You choose to show up for work. You choose to be a caregiver. You choose to be a care coordinator. And so I think, there's this, you could be totally hard done by the situation that you're in. Any job, it could be McDonald's, it can be home care, right? Doctors, lawyers. I mean, you can look at it and be completely jaded, or I think, which I honestly, I've been that person. I find it exhausting. Yep. And I think there's enough challenges in what we do that I would rather, my employees aren't happy every second of every day, but I want them to feel fulfilled. I want them to feel like they're living up to their potential. And, I don't want anyone working for me that doesn't want to work for me. And so I think you can weed out who's the right fit and who's not the right fit just by being human to each other and really investing in people. And that gives them the power to make those decisions and make decisions from an empowered place, I guess, is something I've always felt that way. Like I always want to give people enough information that they feel educated and informed to make a decision. So whether it's a home assessment with a potential client or it's a caregiver coming on board, I want them to have all the information that they need to make a sound decision. And it's my job to facilitate that however I choose to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move to, we talked about a big mistake that you've made, but what's a little mistake that you see home care owners make all the time? And if they stopped, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
I think the micromanaging. I do this sometimes. I'm fully aware, like if I'm having a busy day, like, I just want to cross that one thing off, that easy win, the low hanging fruit, as they used to say in my old sales positions. But I think, if you're constantly closing loops for other people or you're doing tasks for other people, you're not really empowering them to eventually take it over for you, and you have to let go. And so micromanaging, yes, you have to manage, but you also, this is where like giving them the tools to be able to do the job is so important. Because if you're spending all your time, closing shifts for your scheduler, you're never, ever, ever, ever going to break free. You have to be able to let it go.
Yeah. Recovering perfectionist support group right here. Wonderful. Well, we've talked about a lot of mistakes and things that went wrong, but I like to end every episode talking about something that happened recently in your business that you're really proud of.
Oh, well, it's funny. So I had the cutest little home assessment yesterday at the rehab facility with a woman who, honestly, she just made my day. Like it could have gone sideways. She wasn't sure if she wanted care. We sat for an hour, and by the end of it, she realized that she did need care, and she's open to it. And it's not just like, oh, I want one day for 4 hours. She's willing to come on board for the next 3 weeks as she transitions home. And I think, it sounds silly, but like we had a laugh, we had a cry, like she was able to just share her story. And to me, any time that you have the ability to make a connection with somebody like that and to allow them to feel seen and heard, and then to be able to offer a solution that will work for them, that to me, it's a small win, but like I will take those small wins every single day.
Yeah. This is, part of the reason that I love being a part of the home care community. I love not running an agency, but I love being around people who run agencies. This is a deeply human business. And a lot of times it can feel like a logistics company where you're trying to get shipments of care to, ports of client, and it's an impossible like road construction nightmare. But when you have those moments that bring you back to the why behind the business of, no, this is a person who needs help, and it's a very like vulnerable, insecure, kind of exposed position to be in, and we get to be part of that journey, is really, at the end of the day, like a really beautiful part of what all of us get to be a part of. And so anyways, thanks for sharing that. Before we sign off here today, what do you want to plug? Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Betsy Milne. I think that's how that works. I just did it. So I would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. We do have a Home Helpers of San Mateo Facebook page. I hate to admit this out loud. We are just getting that up and running a little bit more. So, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, Betsy, thanks so much for making the time to chat today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
On behalf of the team here at Zingage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zingage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.